We're talking about functionalism as a theory about minds. When I first mentioned the theory, long before we actually encountered Putnam's proposal, I suggested that functionalism isn't so much a theory as a family of theories. Let me explain what I meant by that. Think of functionalism in terms of the following schema. To be in mental state M is to realize or instantiate machine program P, and be in functional state S relative to P. That's a lot of variables, but it's really pretty straightforward. There are 3 slots or variables in the schema that can be filled in various ways to produce a variety of different theories. We're concerned about minds and mental states, but we could also make functionalist theories of corkscrews, mousetraps, computers, wings, eyes, hearts, and so on. And among those who theorize about the mental, one could offer functionalism as a theory about all mental states, or just some, sensations, or also beliefs, desires, consciousness, or just rationality. We've drawn attention to this distinction previously, and we shouldn't forget it. But let's leave it open for the moment and just talk generically about minds and mental states as we often do. This will let us focus on the other 2 open slots in the schema. One variable concerns the object of the theory. We could be offering functionalism as a theory about the nature of minds, as Putnam does. That is, functionalism as a metaphysical theory about what minds really are, so to speak. This is the form we're most concerned with in this class, and probably the most common version in philosophy of mind. But there are other alternatives as well. We could offer functionalism as a methodological injunction. Just as scientific behaviorists claim that psychology is the science of behavior, we could assert that the right way to study minds is to study the function of mental states. Or we could claim that functionalism gives the correct model for psychological explanations, or the correct way to formulate theories about the nature of minds. It could also be that functionalism doesn't tell us what minds are, but it tells us about certain properties of minds. Many philosophers have held that what makes some states of the world, or of bodies, into intentional states, that is, states that have content or are about other things, is that those states play certain functional roles. You might think that what makes a certain state of my brain or body a belief or a memory is that it has the correct input-output function that's distinctive of belief or memory, and that's what makes it that kind of intentional state. Or you might think that among my beliefs and desires, the semantic content of those states, that is, what they're about, is determined by the functional role they play. Beliefs about trees mediate between tree-related inputs and tree-related outputs. Beliefs about dogs mediate between dog inputs and dog outputs, and so on. So you could advance functionalism as a theory of intentionality, or as a theory of the semantic content of intentional or mental states. Of course, you could hook these together. What it is to be an intentional state is to have some content or other, and what it is to have some content or other is to play a certain functional role. And you can hook those theories onto others. Some people have held that intentionality is the mark of the mental. What it is to be a mental state is to be an intentional state. But what it is to be an intentional state is to have some content or other, and what it is to have some content or other is to play a certain functional role. So now we've hooked up semantic functionalism, intentional functionalism, and metaphysical functionalism. It's easy to think of other combinations. The last slot that needs to be filled in this schema concerns the very notion of function and, relatedly, what it takes to realize or implement that function. Putnam introduces functionalism in terms of the functional states of a computing device, and in particular, those of a probabilistic automaton, of which a Turing machine is a special variety. But there are many other notions of computational function as well, including some that are based on semantics or information theory rather than the abstract ones based on mathematical logic that Putnam had in mind. And there are many notions of function that are not computational. The examples I gave of corkscrews, mousetraps, and wings seem to assume that functions can be specified in terms of causes and effects, so some kind of causal notion of function. We could also try to get our notion of function directly from psychology, and that will require us to think more carefully about which psychological theories or frameworks might give us the right notion of function. Does it come from the meanings of psychological terms, from our common sense beliefs about psychology, or from scientific psychology? If functional roles come from scientific psychology, then which parts or which theory? And last but not least, there are biological notions of function that are used in evolutionary theory, biological anatomy and physiology, and other parts of biology and neuroscience. Some of these overlap with the kinds mentioned above, but there are also specifically biological notions drawing on evolution, fitness, and adaptation, such as the etiological and biological propensity accounts of function. I've listed about a half dozen things that functionalism could be a theory about: metaphysics, semantics, intentionality, theories, explanations, methodology. And I've listed about a dozen different notions of function: abstract, mathematical, computational, informational, causal, folk psychological, analytic, scientific psychological, etiological, and propensity. We have to assume that both of those lists are partial. Yet, just by mixing and matching these, we already can postulate over 70 different varieties of functionalism about the mind. Let's discuss each one of them in turn. The question is, which combination would make a good theory? Which combination is most plausible? Which combination has the features that are touted by Putnam and other advocates of functionalism? These questions are not themselves synonymous. They probe slightly different aspects of functionalism, and sooner or later, we'll have to figure out which ones are the most important questions, or else we won't know how much significance we should give to the answers. The last thing I want to mention here, although I think it's extremely important, is that the notion of function that the functionalist employs has implications for what relation holds between minds and brains. If it's a causal function, then the thing has to do, or be apt or disposed to do, a certain causal job. This is a plausible view about the functions of corkscrews and mousetraps, but is it a good view about minds? On the other hand, if a thing has to be adapted by natural selection for its functional role, as is plausible for hearts and lungs, then having that function requires more than just being apt or disposed to do the job. Artificial hearts might not count as hearts, but it might not even require being apt or disposed if the thing has the right evolutionary history. Defective hearts do count as hearts, just broken hearts. In my opinion, a source of great confusion has been that philosophers and scientists have failed to recognize that the realization or implementation relation cannot be held fixed. It varies with different kinds of function. But that's a topic for another day, or maybe another class.